And away we go.
Hi.
Hi.
Um, Hold on. I was in the middle of drawing cards. I was like, well, while we're here, I might as well.
You may as well.
Lighting some incense to deities. And it blazed up. And I was like, this feels like a good time. Feels like they're present because that's who we're talking about today.
It seems like you might have listened to episode 9.
Well, what did we talk about in episode 9, Jared? They're joining us for the first time. Oh, by the way, this is Jeremy Renta. I'm Amy Solara, and you are listening
That's Amy
to
Solara.
Mantra and Magic.
Mantra and Magic. I had to catch myself. We keep going back and forth when I'm describing it to people. I'm like, it's Magic and Mantra. It's Mantra and Magic. It's and Magic Mantra. It's just the words to go in whatever order you want to put them in. Yeah. So last week we talked about working with a little more well-known deities. We were talking about some that you may have heard of before: Ganesha, you know him; Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, Durga, Buddha. Yeah, I mean we didn't talk. Well, we talked about him a little bit. Avalokiteshvara. And you know, Mama in general.
Yeah,
you know,
Pachamama,
big ups to
Madre Tierra,
Pachamama,
Gaia, Sophia Gaia.
Mm-hmm.
All the safe ones. These are like they're like the hall monitors in the High School of Gods. They make sure that people are in the classes they're supposed to be in, and that the troublemakers aren't disrupting the honor students who are trying to get into college.
Mm-hmm. That would be the way that you go, Hermione.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You're very Hermione.
I am. Speaking of like invoking, do you ever, and this is like, we didn't talk about this beforehand, so I'm springing it on you. Do you ever invoke fictional characters?
I've
heard people doing it, and I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because honestly, energetics that are in the collective conscious are they're going to have an energy to them, right? They're going to have a power, and everybody knows their backstory. Yeah. No, I haven't. I mean, again, you start kind of getting into what's fictional and what's not fictional. Because, I mean, a lot of the mystery schools and a lot of these transmissions that people, you know, kind of bring about in more recent ages, in our more recent age, that are outside of Christianity or, you know, in the past, you know, whatever, 2,000, 3,000 years, they're writers will write almost with a pseudonym. You know, they come up with a different name to write the whole thing. They come up with a different character, or they have a life story that they tell about something that happened to them or to the fictional character. And it's literally just the easier way for them to be able to get the point across and say that it happened to someone else, rather than being like, look, this is just kind of a basic instruction manual and it should fit for anyone. Right. So yeah, no, I haven't worked with Harry Potter. I haven't worked with, I mean, it's definitely something, it's something that it is really interesting to me though. I go back and forth, especially since we've been in quarantine working, or reading fiction and nonfiction. And I've been really into the Dark Tower, over the past 2 months. And it is, I don't want to like, you know, give anything away or ruin anything if people haven't read the books, but it has to do with overlapping realities. You know, it's all of Stephen King's books kind of exist in the same universe, and then it starts kind of branching out so that they start interacting with characters from other books in the same universe. So it's like there's so much of that where it literally is all pulling, you know, we're all fishing in the same pond for the most part. So if you find something like that works for you, well, I don't see why that would be problematic.
Part of the reason I ask is there have been so many times that even just you and I, when you lived with us, would have conversations about the way that magic was used, or that energy was used, or that beings had power in certain universes, and like the laws that went along with it, and how deep and diverse all of those things are across the board. Like you could read a Neil Gaiman book and experience magic in a completely different way than reading an Ursula K. Le Guin book, which would be a completely different way of using magic than Garth Nix. And so like there's all of these really well-known fantasy authors too who've delved into really ancient historical documents around that, like the Corpus Hermeticum and different works from Egypt and Greece, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and like you can even see it in Harry Potter. Like the fact you brought up Harry Potter, it's so interesting because she uses so much Latin
Mm-hmm.
and Greek in the spells that she creates and all of the mythological figures like Fluffy. And so I'm just interested in how that fictional world informs our quote unquote non-fictional world, right? Because
Right.
that's something that they talk about in the Kabbalion, how artists perceive the statue or the painting or the character in the written work to be just as much alive as anything else that you could create, i.e. a child, or
Mm-hmm.
have with you like a pet. And they interact with these beings on some level in a way that we almost interact with beings on an energetic level. And a lot of times you hear writers or artists, or those who overlap, who are very Renaissance, they describe their creations in a way that makes them sound like not only are they alive on their own terms, but they're dictating how they're being represented, right? It's like the
Right.
muse is coming through them, and the person who's making the work of art or the written work doesn't have a say in it. They're just letting it channel. And
Literally, it's a channeled text. Yeah.
so I don't know. I feel like sometimes I want to call upon the way that someone uses magic, because that's how, as a child, I really perceived it. I fell in love with this book series that was intended for young readers, but it's still really wonderful if someone wants to have like a quick read in a day kind of thing right now, called the Circle series. And the first one is, I think, just the Magic Circle, and then there's another 4 books that's called The Circle Opens, and they all get apprentices. And there's 4 kids, and they come from all different types of the world, and one is basically earth magic. He can make anything that could possibly be a plant grow. So you could start with a seed, or you could start with a plant that's already like alive and thriving and make it grow even more and manipulate it and change the way it's growing just by like his intention. And then there's another kid who every time she gets emotional, the weather changes. So if she's having a really great day, it's like super bright and sunshiny with a very light breeze. And if she's pissed off, there's a thunderstorm rolling in with crazy lightning. And there's another kid who she can manipulate any metal, like any metal. She can become magnetic. She can also make metal come out of rocks and things and form into stuff. And then the last one was my particular favorite. She wove spells. She took threads of energy and she wove them together into tapestries that she could see. And if you had the sight, you could see them too. And then she would like blanket things or wrap it around, or like toss a ball of yarn like Ariadne and call someone to her. It was amazing. And I loved it. And I always thought, how cool would it be if I could play with the threads of the universe? Oh, wait, what did I do? I became an Akashic Records reader. So like as a 7-8-year-old, I was aware of other possibilities in life because of fantasy novels. So I think it's just something to explore for people if you're looking for a way of interacting with the world in a different way and with deities in a different way. Some of these like almost children's novels could be a really good way of expanding your imagination's possibilities.
Right, because also, like we've talked about, like having a structure is helpful, but if you're just following along in a book that says this is how you cast spells and this is how you do everything, then it doesn't give you a whole lot of freedom to play, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to have that type of stuff as inspiration literally gives you the chance to branch out into that universe. Because if everything is possible, then literally you can do the things that you want to do in whatever your imagination draws into the universe. So yeah, reading is definitely a big part of that too, because when you are reading fantasy novels, you are able to visualize in your own mind what it is that the writer is conjuring, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to match exactly what he saw or she saw or what anybody else who reads it sees, which is one of the reasons why, you know, film adaptations are such a disappointment a lot of the times. It literally is not an accurate representation. It's like, just throw a bunch of money at it and it still doesn't feel like the world.
Yeah.
Where I will say, like with Harry Potter, from the music all the way to the design, at least in the first two Chris Columbus movies, you don't feel so?
I think the opposite. Starting with the third, I think it got a lot more accurate.
Why is that?
I think they made it. I think they aimed it at children in a way that I don't know. With the books, I felt like there was a depth and a fullness to some of the experiences that couldn't translate to film in the way that they had it in the first two. It was almost like too much of a happy ending, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, that was the first two books, literally. I mean,
But you and I have always been on this. You've always loved the first two, and I've never liked Columbus. So,
yeah,
either
I mean,
him
the guy
or
did,
the guy who landed on the shores of an island and spread smallpox everywhere and captured slaves.
Anybody named Christopher Columbus, I got a real beef with you.
No offense to the director. I'm sorry your parents named you that.
Yeah, it's okay. It's totally not on him. So what else did we talk about wanting to discuss today? We talked about working with new deities or working with new energetics, how to safely navigate those waters.
Yeah.
And we also, we'll get to it, but we wanted to talk about the difference between evoking, invoking, and summoning.
And I'm so glad that you looked it up, because this is something I learned today, and I think it's always important to really be open to changing your mind about what something means, because that's something that I get called out on a lot by Anton. He's like, you're such a, like, you're so convicted, like you're this all or nothing feeling from you all the time. And I was like, that's not true. I changed my mind. He's like, yeah, but then suddenly the thing you changed your mind from is wrong.
Yeah, and then you talk about it.
Yeah, so, but I will say with this, I have heard something similar before, and I had it backwards. And it's okay to be wrong as long as your intent is right, I think.
So do we want to start with that, or do we want to, okay. So when we're starting to work with new energetics, when you're starting to work with new deities, there is, like you said last week, the first date, right? The first interaction that you have with one of these energetics. If you're just starting out, it may be that you read about them in a book. You may be that you're watching one of the thousands of television shows that are on Netflix at this point who are dropping, that are dropping, Greek gods or Norse gods or whatever, finding out about whatever it is from whatever television show or books that you're reading. And the first way that you really get to know is literally just kind of saying the deity's name, kind of getting to know the vibration of the energetic. And if you're doing it in ceremony, if you've cast your circle, or even if you're just doing it through, just kind of dropping into nature and wanting to get to know it, or to let it know that you're aware of it and that you would like to invite it to get to know you, you're going to most likely evoke. So the evoke and invoke both have voke in them. So the voke is to call. So you're using your vocation, your vocal, your vocal ability to call in whatever the thing is. When you are evoking, you're literally just inviting. It's a call. You're like, hey, Ariadne. Hey, Jesus.
It's
you're
like
just putting it out there.
A message on social media that's like, party at my house, 6 p.m. We're doing a ritual on whatever.
Yeah, come on by, don't bring your friends.
Don't be a stranger.
Yeah, so literally evoking is just calling. And it's, I think that's probably the safest way too, because you literally get to feel what the energetic of the thing is. Lindsay, my partner, your cousin, has often said a lot of times that when we're in session, when I cast circle or I call in, when I start evoking energies, she's like, it is like you are literally doing a block party, because you start calling in all of these different things. And if you literally, if you invite everybody in, even if they're not working in the circle, the presence there can become very claustrophobic. So when you begin working and you begin evoking, start with one. Just get to know what the energetic is, see how you feel, see how you actually interact with it, see if it's really willing to work with you. You know, that was one of the things we talked about last week too. If you invite something in and you're not ready, your energy is not ready to work with it, or the energy itself is not willing to or wanting to work with you, then it's going to be like, all right, peace.
Right.
You know, it's going to come in, it might show up, and then it might go.
And on top of that, there's a lot of things waiting to get in. This is why we call in guardians and guides and beings whose sole purpose is like to be a bouncer at the gateways.
Right.
And we only open intentional gateways for specific beings to come through. And this is something that I really like to drive home with my one-on-one clients, and that I'm going to really focus heavily on in the coven, and that I had some wonderful teachers begin the process with me that I've refined into my own practice now. But not all, actually, I would say most sources don't explain who the guardians of the watchtowers are. Or who the elemental beings associated with the directions are, or who the other guides and guardians are that related to maybe the three realms, to entering the other side of the veil, to going into the lower world to do shamanic journeying. Like there's guides and guardians on so many levels that you could spend a whole year developing a relationship to before you even step into a space where you're asking specific named deities like Odin or Horus or Shiva to come through. And that's something that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on right now. And I had you call in specific ones when you officiated our wedding for Anton and I had my cousin come up to me afterwards and say, "Are you a Nokian now?" And I was like so happy that he knew that. Like, no, I'm not. I mean, I work with them sometimes, but there's this tradition in reclaiming where they the teachers will turn to each of the directions and they'll say, I invoke the guardian of the watchtower of the east and all the beings of the eastern realm, the winged ones and the air ones. And they just kind of say these like general, broad, beautiful terms that are essentially letting you know that it's a mystery and that you're going to have to either spend a lot more time, like devoted time studying, or be very psychic to figure out who it is that they're actually evoking. So would you quickly go through the archangels?
Yes. So the guardians of the watchtowers, again, this is related to the Kabbalist tree of life. A lot of these,
does this come specifically from Golden Dawn, or is it from Kabbalah?
This has been from the directions. This is Golden Dawn. Yeah. East is Archangel Raphael. Archangel Raphael is the archangel of healing. Any energies that are connected to healing. Again, when there's certain words that you hear that come up whenever you're referring to magical work that, you know, when I first started casting circles and I first started really kind of getting more into my magical practice, you say what you hear other people say, and then you figure out what it actually means sometimes, a lot of times. Like you said, people don't really explain it. So when you say correspondence, what you mean is anything literally that corresponds to that direction, that corresponds to that energetic. So Raphael, guardian of the watchtower of the east. Mikael, guardian of the watchtower of the south. The south is fire.
Can you also say Michael, or are you supposed to say Mikael?
It is literally this is
essentially.
This is why pronunciation is really important. Since it has been Americanized and it has been, you know, kind of transformed into English. Lindsay literally asked me this last night. She was like, "Mikael, that's not Satan, right?" I was like, no, he beat up Satan. Like he was the one that took Satan down. Michael is the slayer of demons. He was the one that kind of came in and, like, you know, kicked the guys out. You know, when all of the wars between heaven and hell. Yes. So again, that's fire, right? So that's the idea of the flaming sword. Gabrielle is the guardian, or is the angel that is associated with the watchtower of the West. Gabrielle is a female energy. You know, it's love, it's boundaries, it's connection. Like you said, it's emotion. And then Uriel, or Ariel, is the guardian of the watchtower of the North. So that's the angelic energy that is North. There's also God names that go into that as well, but I don't want to overload everybody with too much information.
But when someone says the guardians of the watchtowers, they're speaking about the archangels, correct?
Yes.
Because I don't have a background in Golden Dawn, and so it took me forever on my own studies to figure that out, because I don't remember anybody telling me that when I first began studying.
Well, again, the watchtowers, when you hear it, you think I think of, like, when I first started doing magic, I thought of like a rook on a chessboard, right? Like a watchtower. It's something that stands there and is looking out. Well, in the Golden Dawn, the watchtowers are, you know, that may be that in the kind of in the way that we see it, but it's also, there's grid shape patterns that have numbers and letters that equate to the actual deities, because there again is the language barrier. So when John Dee was working on contacting angels, and he didn't have, like we said, we didn't have Twitter, you know, he didn't have angel Instagram. He had to figure out a way to communicate with these energetics that were trying to communicate ideas that didn't speak English, didn't speak Latin. They spoke Enochian, right? They spoke they may speak Sanskrit or Hebrew, because all of the things in Golden Dawn is mainly Hebrew based for the angelic names, the God names. So for that, they came up with these grid patterns for the actual watchtowers, and they're different colors. They have different numbers on them, and through their trance states, John Dee, and I can't remember what his partner's name was. I'll have to look it up. But what they did was, there would be, you know, like almost a line that kind of followed through and showed what the connections were with the numbers. So when you look at, you may see a glyph or something that represents an archangel, that literally you have to have the key, which is the watchtower, to know what the swipes are, what the direction is of those, to be able to translate what the name of it is. So again, all of this stuff is occult. It's hidden in plain sight. You literally have to see it. But that's
literally
the reason
why
part of this is
means. If a lot of people get really like people down like the QAnon threads get really upset at the word occult, and they only associate it with like satanic practices. And actually, occult just means a hidden idea or hidden knowledge, stuff that's been hidden from the masses, because either the masses can't understand it or they would abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when I first saw the watchtowers, I love that you described it that way, because so many people perceive things so differently, right? We've talked about all the different Claires. I just picture a bunch of like girls with different Molly Ringwald faces. I'm gonna make that artwork someday, like a meme. Are you clairvoyant or clairsentient? And one of them's like Molly and Pretty in Pink, and the other one is Breakfast Club.
It's like the movie Heathers.
Yeah. So if you are clairvoyant, you might actually see a whole lot of images when you invoke the guardians of the watchtowers of the East and evoke the guardian of the watchtower of the East and all the beings of the East. You might see suddenly like a ton of images flowing through, and if you're clairaudient, and you would experience it with like words and wind and chimes and sound and all the things associated with the direction of the East, like you said, correspondences. But with the way I always saw it, it was very tarot based, where I, instead of seeing like a single, like a rook watchtower, I saw almost like a castle in each direction with two tall towers and the sun in between each of them, which is really emphasized in the Rider-Waite Tarot, which was created by people who are part of the Golden Dawn. And it makes so much sense that image is in almost every single one of them, this double tower with a light on the other side. And like in the East, I saw it as the rising sun, and then in the South, it was like straight up high between the two towers, was the high noon, and then in the West, it was the setting sun, and then in the North, it's always like a starry night, and the sun is underground. And I would almost see images, instead of instead of them facing outward, I saw the watchtowers as them watching what we were doing, like witnessing.
Wow. Right.
And I think maybe that came from Lord of the Rings and the
the eye.
Yeah, those like beautiful
the
magic
great
balls
eye
that everybody seems to have in a tower. What do they call them? That Sauron has one, and turns out Denethor has one, and not all of the seeing.
That's
stones.
exactly the line that I was thinking of. Yeah, have been accounted for.
Exactly.
Not all of this. Yeah.
Not all the great seeing stones have been accounted for. You don't know who else may be watching. So that's the idea. You don't know who else may be watching. So these beings are helping you. They are watching in all directions. They're watching within to witness the work you're doing, and they're watching without to make sure that nothing else disturbs you as you do that work.
Right. So also, this is Eastern, or this is Western. This is all very Western. In Eastern esotericism, when you start getting into Tantra, it's kind of the same thing, but the directions are parsed out a little bit more. So you have a yantra, and then you have an east, you have a southeast, you have a south, you have a southwest, you have a west, and all of those are watched over by different deities as well. So each of the energetics are obviously, they're opposing. So you have one on one corner that means one thing, and one on another that is the opposite, or the tantric in the tantric spectrum of that energetic. So it covers a little more. It covers a little more ground. And as you progress, again, like there's only so much that can literally be covered in the 45 seconds while we're talking about this specific aspect. But like you'll get to where, there's a different angel or a different energetic that is associated with each element of the zodiac, and then each degree of the zodiac, which is what you get into when you start looking at the tarot. There's 72, right? So then you start 78, yeah. So then you start to look at how each of the energies of the different planets is a different angel. Like everything itself has a bigger energy. We think of the earth as being like this thing that we live on, but it is literally the mother that we all come from. We die, we go back into the earth, we come back out of it.
Or one aspect of us anyway.
Right.
All
well, yeah. I mean, the physical, the physical Malkut, the present Lam. We got that. You gotta have something to kind of base things off of.
Well, I mean, this is also in Egyptian things. They not only have a guardian for each of the directions, they have one for like each of the months has a guardian deity, and like each of the gateways within the duat, which is like the realm of the dead that you pass through to get to either rebirth or the realm of the gods. Each of those has their own specific deity guardian person, and it's to make sure you don't get hurt on the other side, not to make sure that nothing comes in and hurts you, because that's also that's stepping into your sovereignty in a way that a lot of cults and religions and traditions and belief systems don't offer their practitioners, is this idea that you're only going to have something come to you if you invite them, if you evoke them.
Right.
And if you don't evoke them and they're coming in, it means you didn't set up the borders right. You sent out hey, everybody come in. This is an open house party. Kegger, it's going to be
or
amazing.
When you put the wrong email address in and it went to the wrong John, and that John shows up that you hate,
Right. So it's particular, like you've always said, with the words.
Right. And I kind of wonder about this, just again, when you mentioned evoke again, we want to make sure that we stay on track with explaining the difference between evoke and invoke. So when you're evoking any of these energetics, you're evoking things that we know are on the side of light. You're working with anything that is going to be safe to call in. You're working with energetics that again, this is one of the reasons why using some type of ceremonial magic or some type of structure, even if you're reading a book on Wicca, you're reading, you're whatever the thing is, whatever you're finding that you vibe with, that as long as you feel good about using to kind of cast your circle and to work in that space. So we've done that. We've started working with energies that we know and we trust. You've got your bouncers on the corners. And now you can start working with the potential of new energies, right? So you might have somebody that you want to work with that kind of equates to healing. That might be another healer that you've found. because you have already kind of invited those energetics in. Corresponding energies are going to be able to kind of come and go a little more easily through the bouncers, like you said.
Yeah.
So even if you don't necessarily name an energetic specifically, this is how you start to meet new energies. You might not know about Mesopotamian gods or goddesses. There may be that you have someone show up and it's just kind of like you have a word or a name that pops into your head, and then when you do the research on it, you find out that this was a deity that was venerated for being a healer during a certain time. That's also a good way to kind of like start working with new energetics too, is because if you've kind of devoted yourself to a certain path, more of these energies are going to start to seek you out.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something
Right.
too that the word correspondences relates to, and earlier the conversation that you and I had earlier today, with the idea of figuring out not only who you are drawn to, but who is drawn to you based off of things that happen in childhood and things that are currently happening in the moment. So say you are a newly recovering Christian, you're stepping out of a very structured, fundamentalist type of world, and you're moving into a space that is esoteric and open and almost like too open and too unstructured for most people, because everything is possible, everything is available suddenly, and you don't know where to begin when you're searching to see like who is God, who is goddess, who is the all, the energy that it all comes back to, who is on your team, your spirit team, your spirit guides, and like how do you even begin with that? And most of the time I say start with the animals. That's going to be like the biggest one. Is any animal that comes to you hugely is usually going to be one of the main guides in any realm. Like whether you're doing shamanic journeying, whether you're doing trance journeying, whether you're doing guided meditations, traditionally the ones that we open ourselves up to the most and the ones that are the easiest to I say relate to and trust are the animal beings. And there's a reason for that. Like our bodies are pretty much still animals. We haven't moved past that. And it's been, like hundreds of thousands of years that we have been anatomically human, sure, but we haven't changed much since then. They found like so many beings that were basically anatomically the same as us. And so we relate to animals really easily. And then I think part of the reason that most deities are either associated with animals or actually are therianthropes, where they appear half human, half animal, or even more chimerical, where they have like part animal this, part animal that, part animal this, and human face, is because it helps us figure out who we're talking to and who we relate to the most.
Right.
So as like we were talking about, like, ways that we relate to things as children, and this applies too. If as a child you had this affinity for elephants and you can never explain why, and you always were drawing like repeated patterns of flowers everywhere, and you're like you start to put all these things together, and suddenly you realize, oh hey, which goddess has like two elephants on either side of her and a wreath of lotuses around her neck, and I always loved the color red. Oh hey, that's Lakshmi. So you start to see where the correspondences come in order to help you figure out who maybe you want to work with, because you had a natural affinity for them when you were younger. And children are much closer to their soul than older humans in general. I want to say adults. Not everybody becomes an adult. Young children are really close to their soul and to their soul guides. And that's why I think so many have what we call imaginary friends, what they know to be real beings that they're talking to.
Until you get distracted by Transformers or whatever other bullshit
Hence
that
the
ends up getting in your way.
depatterning that needs to occur.
Literally, yeah.
But yeah, I think there's so much insight with that. Like the very first time that I heard the name Inanna, like really heard it, right? And we always talk about eyes to see and ears to hear, which is a very hermetic philosophy.
Right.
The first time I really heard the name Inanna, I just got like covered in chills. And I was like, why do I know her? Why do I know her? And as a child, my mom forced me to read the Bible all the time. Like she was constantly checking my progress and quizzing me on Bible verses. And she would give me the option to pick which book I wanted to read. And I was always obsessed with Revelations and with the woman who was riding the dragon. And I hated that they called her the Whore of Babylon. And I was like, she's pregnant. Don't judge how she got pregnant. And was like always really defensive of her, always really upset that people didn't like the dragon. I always felt really close to the dragon. And guess who I work with now? Inanna and dragons. Like I was seeing the imagery as a child. That was my favorite book in the Bible. I just loved the description of the 4 horsemen, the 4 guardians. Like, there was all this stuff that's built into a specific lens that has been translated for us by other people in a way that fits their agenda, as opposed to the human evolution. And so like looking at some old things that way can also be really helpful, where you're like, I was looking at what was underneath the story. I was looking at what was underneath the doctrine. I was looking at what was underneath the dogma, and tapping into something deeper. And Inanna is a much older goddess. And what does every religion do? It demonizes the gods of the people that they conquer.
They fuck up. Yeah.
Like, oh, they conquered this region, and now we have to teach everybody who lives here to worship our God instead, to prove that we fully conquered you. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to make your beautiful goddess of the stars and the heavens, who has lions walking on either side of her and owls on her shoulders, and she's got wings herself, and she's holding up symbols that look like ankhs because, hey, again, she comes out of Egypt. Most people don't realize. The Star of the East. She is, and she's like in everything, and she's an 8-pointed star instead of a 6-pointed star. So it's a different seal and it's a different signature. And it has become something that a lot of people fear, like in so many ways, but she's a compass in and of herself. She points you in other directions, and she's a total hermetic goddess in the sense that she has a twin who rules the underworld, the other side of the universe. And it's not dark and scary and filled with ghostly like things. It's filled with beings who are being cared for and nurtured and made younger in order to be reborn. And the palace is lapis lazuli with rainbow fountains. Like, it's Ereshkigal Gull is amazing. And people demonized her, just like they demonized Lilith, just like they demonized Jezebel, whose name in the Bible translates to shit eater. That was not her name. The goddess, she was a priestess of Baal. And they changed her name in the Bible to reflect their opinion of her when they conquered that region.
Man. Yeah, I'm actually surprised that you haven't studied more. I mean, you've studied Hermeticism, and I guess the Golden Dawn literally is just kind of like a translation and a structure from that. But like just the stuff that you're talking about, even with the dragons, like there's the red dragon and the black dragon in the Hermetic idea. One of them being the lower, and one of them being our, like the serpent, actually moving up our Kundalini, so that we have our ability to move up into our higher chakras.
Actually, I think there's other colors, but you and I can talk about that later.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, not everything is ready to be revealed all at once. There's
I know. It's hard it's hard to not go down the rabbit hole. So, if you're interested in finding out more,
then join us on Patreon. Or read books or whatever. Don't trust everything you read. Don't trust everything you hear. Again, go back to the very first episode. We talk about discernment and finding your truth and your soul's voice. But these beings will rejoice when you remember their names. It's like you've been hit in the head. Like you had a car accident and you woke up in a different city and someone told you, this is your name and this was your childhood. And you're like, okay. And you just keep living. And then all of a sudden one day you're like turning a corner and there's a crystal shop and you're like, I don't know why, but I feel like going in here. And you walk in and someone says, oh my God. And they say your real name and you're like, and suddenly all the memories come flooding back. Well, that's what's happening in this lifetime for a ton of people on this planet, with Atlantis, with Lemuria, with Egypt, with India, with ancient Celtic pre-Druid experiences, the ones who actually built Stonehenge. The Druids just co-opted it like the neo-pagans in the 60s. And there's so many lifetimes we're all remembering, and these beings are helping us do that, and that's why we're encouraging you to work with them. It's because they will help trigger those memories. Yeah, they're so excited. They're like having a dance party, and that's why Jeremy and I invite too many of them into our rituals, because we love that dance party feeling. We love. I remember I think I brought in 10 goddesses, because I did the 8 spokes, right? So the 4 and then the cross quarters, and then above and below, and then I was holding the center space. So I had 10 other like main goddesses, not even ones that are in the same pantheon, all in the room. And I just like felt the kind of pressure that you feel like when the airplane shifts, like the cabin pressure of the room, and was like, oh, I might have brought too many in today.
I do think we should probably spend this entire episode just talking about evoking, and then we can do invoking. And
well, let's just say that if you ever hear anything that tells you to summon, run away. Like,
well, I mean, when you're starting to get into that, you're getting into the Song of Solomon. You're getting into a lot of the grimoires of, like, you know, the lesser grimoire
and the Solomon working with demons.
Yeah, so that's working with demonic energies, and that is not something to fuck with. No. Like, I don't even as I'm on this path, I don't see myself ever going down the path of wanting to work with demonic energies. No. They have their own agenda. They, you know, and it may not be for the higher good. It may be literally, yeah. Good. But I mean, again, when you start to kind of get into the tantric spectrum of it, I don't want to go down the tantric path of that, because when you call in angels, it can get to the point where you feel comfortable enough doing what you're doing that you literally call in both sides. So there's we'll say a demon, just because that's the easiest way to use it, or the easiest term to use. If you're working with angelic energies, if this is like, you know, kind of the stuff that Crowley started kind of getting into.
I always have never, I should say, anybody who's asked me about magic, I would say, don't go down that path.
Right.
Just don't touch it. Just like you wouldn't, you don't want to mess with full trance possession, which is invoking on the deepest level.
Right. So let's talk about that. So we're talking about evoking. That's literally calling an energy into the space.
EVOKING.
Evoke. Yeah. So you have cast your circle, you've set your space, and then you are literally inviting in energies that can come through, the guardians or the watchtowers, the bouncers that are at the gates. Yeah. They're like, all right, you're pretty all right. I'm going to go ahead and let you in. They allow, you know, those energetics to come in. And if, like I said, if there's things that are related to them, yeah, make sure that they're all on the up and up, and then they allow them to come in. You may have an interaction. You may actually, you know, you may be granted visions from these energies. But by setting pretty much a circle, the way that I do it, at least, by setting a circle of light and then not allowing anything from underneath to come up, anything that has an energetic signature that doesn't match on the higher vibratory scale is going to be forced out. Mm-hmm. So this is the same thing whenever I'm working with someone on the table, and, you know, if they've got something connected to them, or if they have an energy that has kind of been predominantly guiding their actions in their lives, it may be that those things come up, and as they come up, you know, sometimes you have to do a little bit more of a stronger banishing. You literally have to start using weapon mantras or more of a forceful language to remove the thing from the person. But for the most part, that once the thing comes out and its energetic connection to the person that I'm working with, it's literally forced outside of the circle. And then usually the guardians, I ask them the same thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I ask them to guide it onto its next place, make sure that it doesn't go out and harm someone else, doesn't get stuck in the location wherever the session's being taken place.
And this is why we gave you the Durga mantra, Om Dum Durga
Yes.
Namaha, and it's always Namaha, no matter how old you are, because this will drive them out. Also, we mentioned Archangel Michael today. He's another one that you can just instantly call up and say, like, look, I am struggling. This entity will not leave me alone. Please help me get rid of them and send them back to the light. And sometimes they don't want to go back to the light, but say, like, just don't stay here. It's closing time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
Thanks, Fastball. You know that song? That was early 2000s. Yeah.
I'm so gonna use that next time.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
So
I think we're both. I feel like we're both kind of dabbling, or we're like pussyfooting around talking about invoking. So, but let's go ahead and put it out there. So evoking, literally calling in the energies that are going to come in and have a correspondence with the other positive energies that you're working with. Invoking is literally inviting in. It's not just inviting. You're inviting the energetic into you. So this is where people start to get freaked out about possession, or about, like you said, like a really high level of this is called aspecting.
I should say a highly intentioned level. There's an ignorance level, and then there's an awareness level. Right. And most people, when they see indigenous shamanic practices that utilize possession, or when they see hoodoo practices that utilize possession, get very, very afraid. And they have good reason to be very, very afraid when they see it, because it is not a natural thing. It is not.
And this is specifically aspecting, right?
This is invoking. This is full transposition. And I have seen it, and it terrified me when I first saw it, because it's the human whose body they normally inhabit is not there. Or if they are there, they're like hovering behind. And the entity, it's not always a deity, the entity, usually it's an ancestor, is fully utilizing the body, and they don't respect it most of the time. They're so excited that they do really weird things. Like, what did your friend do? Eat like coffee grounds?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who was involved in I guess it was a ritual near the end of the year. It was like a Christmas time thing. And I don't remember the deity that they invited in. Also, if I did, I probably wouldn't say it here. But she was literally eating coffee grounds by the spoonful. She said, I just sat there and I was eating it and I was eating it and I was eating it. And I was with a friend of mine. And then she said, I looked over at the person, and the person asked me a question that I don't remember answering, but I was present to hear my mouth open and to respond to them. And then the person said, oh, hi, so-and-so, the name of the deity. It's good to see you again. And then she said she lost the rest of the night. The next thing she knew, she woke up the next morning and she felt like she had been hit by a bus. Yeah. And again, part of this is because, like you said, whenever you invite something inside, allowing your body to become the vessel for something else, we're more often than not prepared to handle that energetic. And the energy itself is excited to be embodied, and it doesn't know how to control itself. It doesn't know how to control its energy. It hasn't been in a human form either ever or in a really long time.
Yeah, and usually,
it may be more powerful, and it may just be the energy that's flowing through your body. Your synapses literally cannot handle it.
Yeah. Well, also, like, we're not used to running at full spectrum, right? Even science admits that our brains aren't fully utilized, and these beings, because they live on different dimensions, actually do fully utilize. And so it's exhausting, it can be painful, it can be scary. So when we're using our words, when we're being very meticulous with our words, and we invoke, we have to have boundaries. We have to have a solid understanding between the deity and oneself. Like a clear contract, and you have to have people tending you. You cannot do this by yourself. You do this by yourself, you better damn well be like a high priestess who's been doing this for like 50 years, and you've got such a good rapport with this being that they know they're only allowed to use your hands and they won't do anything else. So that's what aspecting is they're taking an aspect of you. They're using a
Mm-hmm.
part of you. You invoke them into your voice, and they're allowed to, you become the voice of the gods, the oracle,
Right.
essentially. So like the oracle in Delphi, that's what she did. Apollo came in and he used her voice. He used her ears. He might have used her hands to throw like the equivalent of runes, right? Bones down.
Mm-hmm.
And she might have read them with his eyes. Like there's these instances throughout history where you find channelers and mediums and psychics and priestesses and priests speaking and not remembering what they've said. And it's because
Mm-hmm.
someone else is using their voice. So when someone is channeling in a speaking context, they've given the deities permission to speak through them. They've become a hollow bone, which is what shamans do. They let the energy
Mm-hmm.
flow through. And it's a really beautiful practice, but it takes a lot of work. I don't want anyone to think that they can suddenly turn around tomorrow and just invoke Hermes and suddenly communicate everything that needs to be said. And that's the other thing too. When you have a tender and the deity says, I really want to do this right now, and your body starts to go, the tender can say, hey, wait, please be respectful of the human you are using.
Mm-hmm.
And usually they will back off. Like one time I was tending a friend, we had invoked Aphrodite into her for a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
As a bridal blessing for someone. I was like, really? We should have invoked Hera. Come on. Juno, like somebody else who has a partner. Aphrodite